Clear the kitchen table, bring in the color TV, plug in your new Apple II and connect any standard cassette, recorder, or player. Now you're ready for an evening of discovery in the new world of personal computers. Only Apple II makes it that easy. It's a complete, ready-to-use computer, not a kit. At $1,298, it includes features you won't find on other personal computers costing twice as much. Welcome back to Designed in California. That was from Apple's introduction ad for the Apple II. And finally, on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Apple II and what it offers. And to do that, of course, I am joined by Jason Snell. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Mike. We are back in time to finally tell the story of what Woz has been working on.
What is doesn't just spray colors on a hotel room TV screen.
All right. So one of the threads I wanted to follow, obviously, is the development of Apple and the relationship in the business. But I have been alluding to the fact that in the background, Woz has been working on his next invention, right, which will become the Apple II. And I thought for this episode, we could talk a little bit about that process of what Woz was doing and how the Apple II came to be. Because throughout the story we've been telling about 1976, which is built around Apple using the Apple I design to create a product they could sell, Woz has moved on to the next one, which will be the Apple II. And just as the work that he had done building a video terminal had crystallized his work building the Apple I, where he's like, oh, I can take the computer and the video circuitry and put them together and have a computer that had video circuitry on it. Oh, yes, yes. For this, it was also the case that display innovations drove the work on the Apple II because Woz wanted color. Some PC makers offered color add-on cards, but Woz wanted to make a computer that could offer color right out of the box. He wanted you to be able to plug his computer into a color TV, which, keep in mind, color TVs weren't even that common 10 years before. A lot of people bought color TVs for the moon landing, ironically not in color. So it was not that long ago.
Why did they do that? People were just excited. They wanted to upgrade their TV to a
They wanted
better
to
TV
upgrade
for
their
that time?
TVs.
Okay.
But if you've ever wondered, which you probably haven't, but I did, why all those characters on Star Trek wear brightly colored uniforms, the answer is because NBC wanted to advertise that they were putting their shows in color. And so they had a brightly colored Star Trek. That was one of the reasons that Captain Kirk wore the bright gold shirt.
I guess like kind of in the way that people will upgrade their television for the Super Bowl or something like that.
It's
like
the exact
people
same
coming over,
motivation.
You want to get a better TV.
Walter Cronkite was in color. It's just that the vision from the moon was not in color, but Walter Cronkite was in color. You could watch Walter
Considering they
Cronkite.
shot the moon landing in a TV studio, you could have used color. You know what I mean?
Right, really, seriously.
Wild.
Okay, this is not an ahistorical podcast, Mike. It's a historical podcast. So, Woz says, color TV. It's great. I want color computer out of the box. His big breakthrough, technically, involved taking advantage of the fact that he was going to integrate the video side and the computer side into a single whole. So remember, the Apple I, he was like, okay, I got this terminal that will connect to like the ARPANET. It's just a dumb terminal, but it's a keyboard and TV out. And he's like, and I have a computer. It's like, oh, I can put them together. But they was still sort of like both things were together on the circuit board. For this computer, he's going to integrate it all into a whole. And then he has a real leap of imagination where he realizes that unlike all the computers that had been built before the personal computer, which were shared systems, personal computers were personal. They had single users. And this is an important technical understanding. People are slow, way slower than microprocessors. Even microprocessors in 1976 are way faster than people, right?
Okay.
So Woz created a ticking clock that let his computer switch between using memory to draw on the screen and executing commands on the microprocessor.
Okay.
So the computer moves so fast that it can very efficiently draw a line on the screen, and then do some work, and then draw a line on the screen. He literally uses the display itself via his expertise in designing display circuitry as the ticking clock. When the computer is drawing one line of the display, everything is focused on drawing that line. In the interval, when that line is not being drawn and the display is going back to draw the next line, because that's how these things work, is they're like a line at a time firing off, and you fill the whole display, and you do that every 25 or 30 times a second, right? That it's happening really fast, but not fast for a computer processor.
Right.
It works faster. So he's doing this time sharing thing. In that interval, the microprocessor hurries up and does everything it needs to do. And then the display draws the next line. So the ticking clock is the lines of the display, not the frames of the display. The lines in a frame on the display. So it's happening very fast. But again, megahertz, kilohertz, megahertz, like these are thousands of cycles a second, way faster than a human being or a TV. So this is a leap never made before because so few people were designing personal computers. So the computers that were being designed with the principles of computers of old. Woz thinks, no, this whole thing is based around this being plugged into a TV. And that was the leap. He integrates the display into the process flow of his computer. And people have argued, and I think it is a decent argument, that this defines what a personal computer is. The idea that it's a merging of a computer and display output in a single user environment where you can switch between what's on the screen and what processing needs to be done because you're not a microcomputer, you're not a mainframe computer, you are just a single appliance, basically, tied to a display. Not optional, tied to the display.
So this is the genius moment. This is the thing that works out. That the computer is, even at this stage, already faster than the, say, as you said, like 30 frames a second that would be needed to draw on a screen effectively, right? If we're boiling it down. So he has worked out that the computer is moving so quickly that it is able to do more processing within the time period of where it's waiting for the television to catch up with it, essentially. So he's able to kind of do so much more in the Apple II itself while waiting in between the moments where it needs to draw upon the television screen. It's very clever. It's very clever stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the 6502 processor that was used in the Apple II runs at a little bit over a megahertz. Okay. So a megahertz is a million per second.
Right.
A million
and
per second.
You only need 30 for the screen.
Well, you need more than that. You need 30 times 525 in terms of NTSC, right?
Yeah.
But that's just 15,000.
Yeah.
So Woz has got a ticking clock. The clock ticks 15,750 times a second, but his processor ticks 1,000,000 times a second.
Right.
So it's like human beings are never going to notice what he's doing, but it enables him to integrate into a single computer. And this is important. It's integrated. It is the breakthrough is that the display is part of the process of being a computer instead of it being a thing the computer offloads to. And that makes a difference for a personal computer. Yeah. Also, Woz does this amazing hack to make it in color. He makes sure that the Apple II's video circuitry runs at exactly 4 times the speed of the standard TV frequency, right? So, so they're going to do it a little bit more than you originally thought because they have to do not just 15,000, they have to do 63,000. Again, 63,000.
A lot of headroom.
Not close to 1,000,000. Yeah. Now, his video circuitry is monochrome, but what he realized is the way that NTSC video works, by dropping pixels at specific times in the cycle, quarters of a time of the cycle, the dots come out red, green, or blue.
Okay.
And he learned this from somebody at Atari who had used it for Pong.
Unbelievable.
So he's hacking the way, if you think about all of this, like this is a cathode ray tube being drawn on by a gun, and he's using it as his ticking clock, and he's hacked the way it draws on screen to be able to get red, green, blue, combinations thereof in order to do color. Now,
so this kind of breaking it down into these parts, it highlights now when we go back to PC-76 why people were so blown away when they would see this thing operating in a hotel room.
In the terrible hotel room, yeah, exactly.
Because now we're understanding just how different this was to the things like the Soul.
It's a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough. And if you recall, the origins of the Apple I were Woz looking at somebody else's computer circuit board design and saying, I could design that with fewer chips, right? It's like, name that tune. I can make that computer in 5 chips. This remains a motivator for Woz. He likes simplifying. And that it has benefits to the computer, to the heat, the energy, the speed, the efficiency, and the cost to make it. So he wants the Apple II to have fewer chips than the Apple I. Because the Apple I was really those 2 devices in one, the chips from the TV terminal and the chips for the computer, he's going to make one integrated thing. It should make it cheaper and faster, and he can use a single set of memory to be used in both of them. That's a big deal too. He also is working on adding support for sound and having a speaker attached to the computer, because the Apple I was silent. He's going to put faster RAM in this thing, and he's going to build in support for BASIC, a simple programming language. He built this version of BASIC himself. It is encoded ultimately in a ROM, which is read-only memory. But just to be clear, other computers in this era, if you wanted to program on them, you had to do something like turn them on and then load off of a tape the operating system, which would be like BASIC programming. Or in some of them, you had to just turn them on and then type in the operating system for half an hour, and then you could use it. So this is going to come literally, if you turn it on, you could just start typing in programs because it's in the read-only memory BASIC programming language. As Woz told, I believe, David Pogue for his Apple First 50 Years book, it wasn't just twice as good. It was like 10 times better.
Well, you would say that.
Could call it the Apple 10.
Well,
Apple X. A little too early for that. Then there was the issue of expansion, which I mentioned in our last episode. Woz wanted the Apple II to come with 8 expansion slots, which would allow people to add all sorts of functionality to the computer after the fact. Make it much more flexible. We can't wait to see what you do with it, to coin a phrase, because it could be anything. Things that Woz didn't even think about. Things that Woz thought about, but thought, I can't put that in every one, but people who need it could add it after the fact. And if you didn't listen to our last episode or forgot that, I think anybody who knows anything about Steve Jobs, the guy who never wanted like buttons or switches on anything, was opposed to expansion slots. Absolutely, he was. He thought it only needed 2, one for a printer and one for a modem. What else could you do? So they fought about this, but Woz won, and he was absolutely right, because those slots opened up the enormous potential of the Apple II. I don't even know how many expansion cards I had in my Apple IIe. I think it was at least 4 or 5. And Woz told Walter Isaacson in the Steve Jobs biography, I knew that people like me would eventually come up with things to add to any computer. So he really is thinking of this as a platform for other people to build on top of, which was another great insight and is why he was right to fight Jobs on this.
So what were you putting into those slots? Like if we jump forward in history, because this is just not something that I experienced. So like I can't think of what, you have 8 slots on the Apple II. What would go into them over time?
So the disk, so the Apple II didn't come with a floppy disk drive, and we'll be talking about that later. So one of the slots you put the disk controller in, which was designed by Woz.
Yep.
And then you put your floppy disk on the outside. You run it through a little door in the back, and then the floppy disks sit there, and then that's how you use the disk drive. Printer, you get a printer card, and then attach your printer to it.
But obviously, the monitor, the display was taken care of.
That was taken care of. Although you could, I think, buy a display card and add maybe a different kind of like an RGB display or
Okay.
something.
A more advanced display.
A more advanced display in that era, anyway. I had a modem card.
Okay.
So Jobs was right about that, printer and modem. There were a bunch of things later. Like for a while, I was doing as a teenager, I did some contract work for a local company doing data entry for a database they wanted, and that was all working in CPM, which was a totally different operating system. You could get a CPM card and put it in there, and you could basically reboot the Apple II into CPM and use WordStar and use a database and all these programs that didn't run on standard Apple computers. So there's a lot of flexibility for stuff like that. My modem card was like a sound card too. It would play digitized audio at a quality level that the Apple II speaker couldn't. So all sorts of stuff like that you could think of that were for specialized or general interest. I think there was an 80 column card at one point, which basically you could, instead of the original display was 40 characters across, but you could take it up to 80. Everything got a little smaller, but you could see more words on the screen. Lots of stuff, lots of expansion was there. So Woz was absolutely right to do that. And he created a whole market. This is a thing that now it almost seems obvious to us, which is he created an accessory market. And the accessory market, by creating that platform, helped the Apple II be more than Apple ever anticipated it could be, because people could build on top of it. And that was a huge insight that Woz had that he was proven right about.
Okay. So over the series so far, we've spoken about the importance of the future of computing being that these things would sit inside of boxes, that they were designed to be all in one. And it goes back to that ad that I read at the beginning of the episode. So why don't we take a break now, and when we come back, we can look at what was this case and how on earth did they get there.
Hey, everybody, it's us from a different time when we're telling you about that you're listening to Design in California, and we are still doing our Kickstarter. That's why these are in the upgrade feed. If you have not become a supporter, we would like to ask you to consider that, having listened to these episodes. You can also raise your pledge and get some cool stuff all over at designed.fm through the end of June. So you've still got plenty of time, and we would love to get your support for the next year of Design in California, which we're doing now, Mike. We're doing it.
Yep. Yeah, we're halfway through the campaign now. We're past halfway. This is the penultimate episode in the Road to Apple II series, so there's one more after this. That will be the final one in the campaign period, but the Kickstarter campaign runs all the way through to the end of June, like Jason mentioned. We are committed to making this show, and so now every dollar that we receive is helping us make the project better. We still have things that we want to do, we have processes that we want to work out, and the safety of knowing how much money we have raised makes us feel confident in decisions that we're making that will make this podcast better overall. And we're both very committed to making it the best it can be, and we're looking forward to, over the coming weeks, really kind of nailing down our process now, safe in the knowledge that we have the resources to fund the year easily. So thank you so much for your support.
Yeah, can't wait to get started at the production work of the actual show. And obviously, we've already heard from people like there will be, when it's all said and done, you will get a code that will allow you to join and sign up for the member version if you do support us that way. We will do a feed that will be preloaded with these episodes, as well as our Apple at 50 episode of Upgrade that will become, retroactively Design in California episode, and then we'll roll forward from there. So all starting the planning process, really excited.
Yep.
And yes, every dollar that gets pledged helps us devote time to this and also have a budget to do good stuff to make the show better, which is a big part of what we're trying to do here.
So check it out, design.fm. If you've backed already, have you considered going up? You can give us more money and you get more for it. If you have not yet backed, then please do. That is over at designed.fm. And thank you so much if you support us with Upgrade Plus. We really appreciate you every week for doing that, and we hope that you continue to benefit from that. And as an extra thank you, we have a set of links in the show notes that are just for you that will give you discounts on some of our tiers. And so you can get some pretty big discounts on some of our physical item tiers. So maybe you've already supported, go take a look there as well, and you can get a discount there as well. So thank you so much for you doing that.
And now back to the show. Welcome back to Design in California. We left Steve Jobs thinking there needs to be a case around this thing. I don't want it in a cigar box. I don't want it screwed to a piece of wood. Tie it to some driftwood, send it out there, see who buys it. Nobody. So they need a case. And among the other things in that case, they need a power supply, right? They need a way to power this thing because, again, it's not meant to be a kit. You can't just say, hey, homebrewers, bring your own power supply. And this is interesting. This is an interesting little story because it's analog technology power. Woz doesn't care. Woz is a digital man. He really is. And Jobs, being Jobs, he doesn't want a good power supply. He wants a great power supply. Most importantly, he wants a power supply that runs so cool. Maybe you could not have a fan in the computer? Typical Steve Jobs, right?
Yep.
Everybody knows that he hated fans. They're too noisy. To this day, Apple tries very hard to sell computers without fans, even though fans are very good at keeping computers cool and letting them run faster.
But it's so great if you don't have one.
I know. This is the conundrum. Well, back in the 70s, computers that were in cases, not out in the open air, needed fans. And fans were noisy. So Steve Jobs didn't like it, but Woz, not an analog guy. Power supplies are super analog. Woz's brilliance is not going to save the day this time.
Okay.
So Steve Jobs asks around. And eventually a friend at Atari, those Atari connections come back again, says, I know a brilliant analog engineer. His name is Rod Holt. Rod Holt is a character.
Okay.
He is almost universally described in all books about Apple's history pretty much the same way. As Steve Jobs put it, he was a chain-smoking Marxist who had been through many marriages and was an expert on everything. He loved socialism. He loved socialism almost as much as he loved motorcycles.
Okay.
Are you getting a picture of this guy?
Yeah.
He tells this Steve Jobs kid a very high hourly consulting rate to build the power supply. And Steve Jobs says, okay, yes. Later, Rod Holt said, he just conned me. How can I tell you to go away if you agree to my demands? So on comes.
Oh, so the con is Jobs said yes.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a strange con, but it is in a way, right?
I don't know how I got work for this, but Jobs, he said, yeah, come on. So Rod Holt, motorcycle Marxist, vitally important to Apple. Also an adult among children. Stories go that he recognized early what motivated Woz and did a lot of managing up, including holding Woz to some higher standards as the Apple II was being built. And I think Woz probably had respect for Rod Holt because he was not only older, but an accomplished engineer in an area that Woz was not an expert in. So I think Rod Holt ends up being a good counterbalance for Woz, saying, you can't do it that way, because Holt has seen some stuff and he has some cred. So I think that he's able to manage Woz at a level that maybe would have been harder for somebody like Steve Jobs, who might not know some of the technical details and might have let some stuff go. Whereas Rod Holt was comfortable saying, you can't do it that way. Okay. You just can't do it that way. So Holt designs the power supply. And as Steve Jobs wanted, it is groundbreaking. It switches the power off and on. Again, you're talking about we can do this faster than humans. Switches the power off and on thousands of times a second, which allows it to remain cooler. Steve Jobs said later, that switching power supply was as revolutionary as the Apple II logic board was. Rod doesn't get a lot of credit for this in the history books, but he should. Every computer now uses switching power supplies, and they all rip off Rod's design. That's Steve Jobs talking. But I have good news for Steve Jobs, wherever he might be today, in whatever dimension he resides. Rod Holt gets credit in history podcasts, if not the books.
So Rod Holt is a name I did not know until we went through this document. What do you know much about what happens to Rod kind of into the future? Does he remain at Apple?
He remains at Apple for quite a while. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. He kind of settles in there. But this is for the Apple II. This is the big moment. Is that power supply, which does run cool enough that Steve Jobs cannot put a fan in the Apple II.
Okay, so it's very important.
Even though they sold add-on fans. I mean, let's just be clear. Other companies sold add-on fans to make it run cooler. But yes, especially if you put a lot of cards in there, it got kind of hot in there, and you need to blow some air through it. But it was a big deal. And remember, Steve Jobs is trying to imagine, how do I get everything in a case?
Yeah.
And you got to have that power supply, and ideally you've got to have it so that he doesn't have to put a fan in the case. Okay. So it's all part of what Rod Holt is doing here. Key person, and having the analog engineer on the team, filling out a part of Apple's product competency that Steve Wozniak doesn't have.
So at this point in the Apple II, we have two big breakthroughs. We have the way in which Woz has worked out to put graphics on the screen.
Right, which leads to a bunch of other stuff like more efficient use of memory and fewer chips, and then he's also adding sound and some other stuff like that.
With his, essentially, we'll call it the ticking clock, right? The way that he has worked out how to kind of have the processors draw and process, mm-hmm. And now we have Rod Holt's power supply, which also, I think, hilariously is switching on and off. It's all about on and off. Yeah, this machine. It's all about on and off.
It's all thinking about the fact that these devices run so fast that you need to change your way of thinking, right? The idea that even the first Apple II in the mid-'70s ran at a megahertz, and a megahertz is 1,000,000 cycles a second. Like, it's slow. We all work in gigahertz now, but at human scales, it's impossibly fast, and they were taking advantage of that scale.
Well, I guess it's that funny thing of the Apple II sitting in between the existing technology that came before it, both electricity and TVs, right? Yeah. So it's faster than a TV, and it's faster than electricity in a way that it doesn't require the constant flow of electricity.
Right. It's able to do whatever it needs to do. I'm not an electrician, but it's able to make the switching power supply so it can sip the power
as it needs
and stay cool
and not constant.
So, meanwhile, Steve Jobs is looking for a case, right? Steve learned the lesson of the Apple
case.
I. I mean, nobody's been more excited about a hunk of plastic. So the Apple I lesson, it was supposed to make it easier for hobbyists to build their own computer. Then Paul Terrell at the Byte Shop funds to make it a project to assemble motherboards. But even then, it doesn't have a case, it doesn't have a keyboard, it doesn't have a display. And he understood, Jobs did, what Terrell was saying when he was like, I really want a complete package. I want it with a case and a keyboard and a display. He was also undoubtedly influenced by the Sol, which he saw in Atlantic City in its metal box, looking like a piece of industrial equipment. He's like, all right, we are ahead because of Woz's skill, but Sol is complete, pre-assembled. It's an appliance, right? Sheet metal appliance. So he knows they got to do this. This next computer has to be that. And what Jobs told his biographer, Walter Isaacson, is, my vision was to create the first fully packaged computer. We were no longer aiming for the handful of hobbyists who liked to assemble their own computers, who knew how to buy transformers and keyboards. For every one of them, there were 1,000 people who would want the machine to be ready to run.
I know we've gone through, obviously, the many breakthroughs they've had. But what? We're less than 2 years?
It's months, Mike. It's months. It's like 6 months.
From the beginning of the company?
It's months.
Really?
It's months.
We're still only months?
It's months. It's months.
They are so wildly ambitious as a pair. That's unbelievable.
Yes. It's months. We haven't gotten the showing off the Apple II will be a year after they started Apple Computer.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and this is
okay.
I think one of the important things about this timeline is to remember we view it. This is what I said before. We view it as the Apple I happened and they did that, and then they made the Apple II and did that. But that's not what happened. It's all overlapping. The Apple I was designed. Everything that happens with the making of the Apple I's in the garage and putting the chips in them and all of that, Woz already is done. He's moved on. He's already thinking about the Apple II at that point. So it's happening fast, but it's also happening in parallel. They're productizing Apple I a little bit, but Woz is building Apple II, and Jobs is starting to think, how do we make a product here? That's the important thing. Okay. So Jobs knew, and this is one of those things that it's almost intuitive to Steve Jobs. It's one of his special powers, that how a product was marketed and packaged determined how it was received, which is, by the way, why Apple is a leader in product packaging and sweats those details to this day. It's because Steve Jobs understood how a product is marketed and packaged is how it's going to be received. So he asked Ron Wayne, the guy who had 10% and the tiebreaker, and designed that Isaac Newton logo, to design a case. But Ron Wayne was like, let's be realistic here, and created something that could be made in a metal shop, and it had a plexiglass cover and a roll top door, like an old desk that slid over the keyboard. And Jobs was like, no, that's not what we want. Jobs, meanwhile, is thinking about this a lot. He's thinking about consumer products, right? Because computers are not consumer products at this point at all. And he wants the Apple II to be a consumer product. That's his dream. So Steve Jobs is going to department stores. He's paying close attention to how consumer appliances are packaged. One of the real star products of the 70s was the Cuisinart food processor. Plastic case. Just iconic. Hewlett-Packard calculators. Iconic plastic cases. He's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Plastic case.
Is this the first kind of evidence that we have of Jobs kind of considering the Apple II to be more of a home appliance, like a thing for the rest of people?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a wild leap, right? All the computers of this era, it's like the Sol or what Ron Wayne had designed, something you could make in a metal shop. They're cheap and industrial, shielded appliances that are not friendly home appliances. They're they're less like a Cuisinart and more like a washing machine, right? And Jobs thought that sent the wrong message. Sheet metal is for heavy appliances. It's for your dishwasher. It's for your refrigerator. It's too industrial. He wants it to be something that would fit in a living room or a kitchen, which is why he's going to department stores and thinking about home appliances and kitchen appliances, which leads to the Cuisinart.
What was the Commodore PET made from?
I think it was metal.
Okay,
sheet
so
metal.
It was also metal. Okay,
I think so. But the VIC-20 and the C64 were plastic, so there was a real kind of leap that happened there. Yeah. So Jobs needs another designer because Ron Wayne's not going to do it. He pitches a guy named Jerry Manock, 33, so older than Jobs and Wozniak. Mm-hmm. Used to work at HP, just went freelance. We know what that's like. You're picking up work. You got to pick up work. He meets Manock at the Homebrew Computer Club. Manock is sort of doing a similar thing to Rod Holt. Is like, well, I mean, I don't know how much Steve is bathing at this point, but he's like, I'll do it, but you got to pay me in advance. Just, I don't know. Do you have the money here? And it actually sounds like in the end he didn't get paid in advance, but he took the job.
Okay.
He took the job. Jerry Manock did. And he designed what is the Apple II case. He designed a low plastic case with a removable lid you pop off that offers just enough space, just enough headroom to fit in those expansion cards.
Okay.
It's compact. It's got rounded edges. It's designed more like a kitchen appliance than a piece of industrial machinery. Manock actually thought that it should have little handles, recessed handles on the sides so you could pick it up. And Steve Jobs is like, no handles. And then Jobs suggests that they chrome plate the interior of the case so it looks awesome when you open it up, which is a real Steve Jobs moment.
I really like that. It's like, oh yeah, so you want to open it? Great. Well, what if we made it really good inside?
Really shiny inside. If you look under the motherboard, it's shiny. Just a genuinely demented idea. Jerry Manock talked him out of that one. So,
because there is that thing, right? Of like, what is the Steve Jobs thing of like painting the other side of the fence?
Yeah, or it's what his father said of the idea of the back of the piece of furniture that's against the wall should look as beautiful as the part that's facing out.
Which is still it's still a nice idea, but the chrome plating might be a step too far.
It
making
does
it look good inside when you open it is one thing, but chrome plating it is something completely different.
It's bananas, just totally bananas. So keeping in mind, Ron Wayne was like, you'll make it in a metal shop. Jerry Manock's design requires, it's plastic. It requires complexity on a whole other level, which is probably why nobody else is doing it in this period. It needs to be made with injection molding. Injection molding is you melt ABS plastic and then inject it into a metal mold. The mold itself costs as much as $100,000, which is about $500,000 in today's money. And it will take months to make that mold.
Yeah, because it's worth noting that molding like this, which I assume at this point it was being done in America, which is not where you would have this done.
Yeah, this
today.
is all it's going to be done in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a local product, and this is at a time when that stuff is available at your local plastics company, basically, right?
But even today, if you're making something like this in Asia, you're doing a similar thing. You're having a mold made, and it's very expensive. The tooling on making a mold is very expensive. But the idea is you pay for it once, and you use it for a
millions
really long
of
time.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the problem is Apple doesn't have this kind of time. It is now early 1977. The Apple II is going to be ready. They're going to show it at the West Coast Computer Fair, which is a big new trade show in San Francisco in April. They do not have time. It's a matter of weeks. But they have to do it. This is their coming out party. Everybody's decided this is the moment they're gonna start showing off the Apple II. It's got to be ready.
Okay.
So what are they going to do?
Why does it need to be at the West Coast Computer Fair?
They had decided that this was the big coming out moment for the computer industry, and they needed to be there. They're feeling the pressure, I'm sure, from the competition, and this is going to be their moment. But they have left it too late, right? They have left it too late. And I mean, look, once again, I'm going to point out this is a company that less than a year before was funded by the founders selling a van and a calculator, okay? Yep. They have Mike Markkula now. There is some adult supervision. There is some funding. But it is not a well-oiled operation. This is less than a year into Apple. They are kind of flying by the seat of their pants here. And they've gotten to this deadline, but they're not going to be able to make a case suitable for a mass-produced product the way they want it in the timeline because the mold is going to take too long. So they go to plan B, which is a process called reaction injection molding, which is faster and cheaper. It uses a mold that's a lot easier and cheaper to make than a metal one, but it is less reliable. That's why you wouldn't want to use this. You'd want to use injection molding if you could, and not this reaction injection molding, which is like a cheaper process, but it's cheaper and faster. You got to do it.
So now they have a path to being able to produce, I guess, a handful of models to be able to display it at the West Coast Computer Fair.
Exactly.
To sell directly, to sell to buyers. Who is the West Coast Computer Fair for?
Nobody knows. They've never held one before. The people who are doing it have no idea whether it will just be homebrew computer club nerds, whether it will be a little broader, or if I mean, what if like every person who's interested in technology in Northern California or the United States says, "This sounds really exciting. I don't know much about computers, but let's see what's there." What if that were to happen?
You got to be ready.
You got to be ready.
So in our next episode, which is the final episode in the season of The Road to the Apple II, the Apple II will be shown to the public for the first time at the West Coast Computer Fair, hopefully in a case.
Hopefully in a case, and who will come through those doors to look at the brand new Apple II? We will find out next time.